The golden sunlight caught the wedding band in Abigail Hawkins' trembling palm, casting a halo that seemed to mock the darkness that had settled in her heart since Thomas' passing. The modest pawnshop in Cottonwood Springs, Colorado looked exactly as desperate as she felt on this sweltering August day in 1878, a collection of forgotten treasures and broken dreams. $5, madam. That's the best I can do, said Mr. Finch, the pawnbroker, his spectacles perched low on his nose as he examined the simple gold band. His shop smelled of dust and disappointment. Abigail's throat tightened. But sir, my husband paid $15 for it just 3 years ago. Gold's price has fallen, and there's nothing special about it. Plain band, no stones. Mr. Finch slid the ring back across the worn counter. $5. Abigail stared at the ring, the last physical reminder of Thomas and the promises they'd made, but promises wouldn't feed her or her 5-year-old daughter, Emma. The drought had taken their crops, pneumonia had taken Thomas, and now hunger was threatening to take everything else. I'll take it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. As Mr. Finch counted out the coins, the bell above the door jangled. Abigail didn't look up, too ashamed of her circumstances to meet anyone's eyes. Afternoon, Mr. Finch, a deep voice drawled from the doorway. Hot as blazes out there. Samuel Garrett. Back from driving that herd to Kansas, I see, Finch called out cheerfully, his tone considerably warmer than it had been with Abigail. Abigail recognized the name. Everyone in Cottonwood Springs knew Samuel Garrett, one of the most successful cattle ranchers in the county. 30 years old and never married, he was the subject of much speculation among the town's unmarried women and their matchmaking mothers. She quickly pocketed the coins and turned to leave, keeping her eyes downcast, but her shaking hand betrayed her as she dropped one of the precious coins. It rolled across the wooden floor, coming to rest at the toe of a well-worn leather boot. Samuel Garrett bent down and picked up the coin. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his simple cotton shirt. His face was tanned from years under the Colorado sun, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. Instead, his blue eyes were fixed on her with an unsettling intensity. I believe this is yours, madam, he said, holding out the coin. Thank you, Abigail murmured, quickly taking it without meeting his gaze. She would have hurried past him, but Samuel stepped aside to let her pass in such a way that he caught a clear view of her face. Recognition flashed in his eyes. Mrs. Hawkins, isn't it? Thomas Hawkins' widow. He asked gently. Abigail nodded stiffly, clutching her reticule containing the paltry sum that was supposed to feed them for the next 2 weeks. Yes, sir. I'm sorry for your loss, madam. Thomas was a good man. Thank you. She couldn't bear his kindness, not now. If you'll excuse me. She rushed out into the blinding sunlight, willing herself not to cry until she was well away from the pawnshop, and the piercing blue eyes of Samuel Garrett. Samuel watched her go, her slender figure hurrying down the dusty street, her faded blue dress hanging loosely on her frame. He'd known Thomas Hawkins not well, but enough to exchange greetings in town, a hard-working farmer with a pretty wife and a little girl. Samuel had heard about his death during the winter, but he'd been away on cattle business and hadn't given much thought to what had become of the widow and child. Turning back to Finch, he gestured toward the counter where Abigail had stood. What business did Mrs. Hawkins have here today? Finch shrugged. Same as most these days, hard times forcing folks to part with keepsakes. She pawned her wedding ring. Samuel frowned. Her wedding ring. Yep. Plain gold band. Gave her $5 for it. Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd come into town to purchase supplies, but now his errand could wait. Show it to me. Finch raised an eyebrow but pulled the small ring from the drawer where he'd placed it. Samuel took it between his fingers, noting the worn inside where it had rested against a finger for years. How much to buy it? He asked. Well, I'd have to mark it up, of course. Say $8. Samuel placed a $10 gold piece on the counter. I'll take it. And I'll thank you not to mention this transaction to anyone. Finch pocketed the money with a knowing smile. Never saw you, never saw the ring. With the wedding band secure in his vest pocket, Samuel stepped back into the hot afternoon sun. He hesitated, unsure of his next move. What exactly was he planning to do? Return the ring to a woman he barely knew? Why did it matter to him that Abigail Hawkins had been forced to pawn her wedding ring? He had no answer except that the look in her honey-brown eyes, pride battling desperation, had stirred something in him. Samuel found himself walking toward the edge of town where the Hawkins farm lay, about a mile past the last buildings. He knew the place, a modest homestead with good water access, but hard-packed soil that took back-breaking effort to farm. As he walked, he considered what he knew about the widow's situation. Thomas had died in January. It was now August, and the region had suffered one of the worst droughts in memory. If Abigail was pawning her wedding ring, things must be dire indeed. The Hawkins farmhouse came into view, a small, weathered structure with a sagging porch. The fields beyond lay fallow, brown, and barren under the merciless sun. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney, and a clothesline held a few faded garments fluttering in the hot breeze. As Samuel approached, he saw a small girl sitting on the porch steps, her blonde hair tied in two neat braids. She was playing with a cloth doll that had seen better days. When she spotted him, she stood up, clutching the doll to her chest. "Mama," she called, not taking her eyes off the stranger. Abigail appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a threadbare apron. When she saw Samuel, her expression shifted from curiosity to wariness. "Mr. Garrett," she said, coming to stand protectively beside her daughter, "is there something I can help you with?" Samuel removed his hat, suddenly feeling awkward. What had seemed like a simple act of kindness now felt intrusive. "Mrs. Hawkins, I hope you'll forgive my presumption in coming here." She waited, her face guarded, one hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. "I noticed your situation at the pawnshop earlier," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "And I wondered if perhaps I might be of some assistance." Her spine stiffened. "That's very kind, Mr. Garrett, but we're managing just fine." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, but so was the hollowness of her claim. The untended fields and her thin frame told a different story. "I'm sure you are, madam," he said gently, "but I have a business proposition that might be of mutual benefit." Curiosity flickered in her eyes. "What sort of proposition?" Samuel improvised quickly. "I've been thinking of expanding my operation to include some crops, diversification, you see, but I know nothing about farming. I was hoping I might hire you as a consultant of sorts, your knowledge in exchange for a fair wage." Abigail studied him, suspicion evident in her expression. "Consulting," she repeated flatly. "And what exactly would this consulting entail? Advice on what to plant, when to plant it, perhaps some supervision of the work?" He gestured vaguely toward her fallow fields. "I can see you know your business." Her eyes narrowed. "Mr. Garrett, while I appreciate your creativity, I'm not looking for charity disguised as employment." Samuel met her gaze steadily. "It's not charity, Mrs. Hawkins. It's an honest proposition. I pay for knowledge I need, you provide it." Simple as that. The little girl tugged at her mother's skirt. "Mama, I'm hungry," she whispered, though not quietly enough that Samuel couldn't hear. Abigail's face softened as she looked down at her daughter. "Soon, Emma, we'll eat soon." She turned back to Samuel, conflict evident in her expression. "I'll consider your offer, Mr. Garrett, but I'm not making any promises." Samuel nodded, understanding her reluctance. "That's all I ask." He hesitated, then reached into his vest pocket. "There's one more thing. I believe this belongs to you." He held out the wedding ring. Abigail's eyes widened in shock, her hand automatically going to her bare finger. "How did you? I saw you in the pawn shop," he explained. "It didn't seem right that you should have to part with something so meaningful." Her expression hardened. "So you bought it, without asking me?" "I apologize for the presumption," Samuel said, suddenly realizing how his action might appear. "I just thought you could swoop in and solve my problems." Her voice trembled with a mixture of anger and something else, perhaps embarrassment. I made that choice, Mr. Garrett. It was mine to make. You're right, he conceded. It was presumptuous of me. I should have asked. She stared at the ring in his outstretched palm, conflict evident in her eyes. After a long moment, she said, "How much? I beg your pardon. How much did you pay for it?" "I'll reimburse you when I can." Samuel shook his head. "There's no need for that. Please, just take it back." Emma was watching the exchange with curious eyes. "Is that Daddy's ring, Mama?" Abigail's expression softened as she looked at her daughter. "Yes, sweetheart, the one he gave me when we got married." Emma smiled. "Then you should keep it. Daddy would want you to." The simple wisdom of the child hung in the air between them. Samuel watched as Abigail's resolve wavered. $5, she said finally. "That's what I got for it, and that's what I'll pay you back." Samuel knew better than to argue. "As you wish, Mrs. Hawkins." With visible reluctance, she reached out and took the ring from his palm, their fingers brushing momentarily. A spark of something awareness perhaps passed between them, causing Abigail to withdraw her hand quickly. "Thank you," she said stiffly, closing her fingers around the ring. "And regarding your proposition, I'll think about it." Samuel nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "That's all I ask." "Good day, Mrs. Hawkins, Miss Emma." He tipped his hat to the little girl, who offered a shy smile in return. As he turned to leave, Emma called out, "Mama makes the best apple pie in Colorado. You should try it sometime." "Emma," Abigail scolded, but there was a hint of amusement in her voice. Samuel glanced back with a smile. "Is that so? Well, I'm quite fond of apple pie." "Perhaps," Abigail said carefully, "if we come to an arrangement about this consulting work, you might have the opportunity to judge for yourself." It was a small concession, but Samuel recognized it as the olive branch it was. "I'd like that very much, Mrs. Hawkins." As he walked back toward town, Samuel found himself smiling. He'd accomplished at least part of what he'd set out to do, returning the ring, and possibly opened the door to helping the proud widow and her daughter without damaging her dignity. It was a start. 3 days later, Samuel returned to the Hawkins farm with a wagon loaded with seed for winter wheat, some basic provisions, and a detailed proposal for Abigail's consulting services. He'd spent the intervening time working out a plan that he hoped would seem legitimate enough to persuade her to accept his help. As he approached, he saw that some effort had been made to tidy the yard. The porch had been swept, and a vase of wildflowers sat on the small table beside the door. Emma was helping her mother hang laundry, chattering away as Abigail pinned a shirt to the line. "Mr. Garrett's back, Mama," Emma announced when she spotted him. Dropping the clothespin she was holding and running toward the wagon, Abigail straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. She'd done something with her hair. Samuel noticed arranged it more carefully than during his previous visit. The thought pleased him unreasonably. "Good afternoon, ladies," he called, bringing the wagon to a halt and setting the brake. "You brought a lot of stuff," Emma observed, peering into the wagon bed. Samuel climbed down, smiling at the curious child. "Indeed I did. Some of it's for your mama to look over seed samples and such, for our business arrangement if she's amenable." Abigail approached more cautiously, her expression guarded but not unwelcoming. "I've given your proposal some thought, Mr. Garrett, and," he asked, trying not to appear too eager, "and I believe we might be able to come to an arrangement, provided the terms are fair." She gestured toward the porch. "Would you care to discuss it over some coffee? It's not fancy, but it's hot." Samuel's heart lifted at this small sign of acceptance. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Hawkins." As he followed her up the porch steps, he caught a glimpse of gold on her left hand. She was wearing the wedding ring again. The sight gave him an unexpected pang. Of course she was Thomas Hawkins' widow, and that ring symbolized her commitment to a man now gone. It was right that she should wear it, so why did it bother him? Inside, the Hawkins home was modest but scrupulously clean. A few pieces of simple furniture, worn but well cared for, filled the main room. Childish drawings were pinned to one wall, and a shelf held a few books treasures in this remote part of the country. "Please sit," Abigail said, gesturing to the table while she moved to the stove to pour coffee. Samuel sat, removing his hat and placing it on his knee. "You have a lovely home, Mrs. Hawkins." She glanced around with a sad smile. "Thomas built most of the furniture himself." "He was good with his hands." Samuel nodded, not knowing what to say. He was saved from responding when Emma climbed onto the chair next to him, her doll clutched in one arm. "This is Matilda," she informed him solemnly, holding up the rag doll. "Daddy made her for my birthday before he went to heaven." "She's a fine doll," Samuel replied with equal solemnity. "Pleased to meet you, Matilda." Emma giggled, and for a moment, Abigail's face softened as she watched the interaction. She brought 2 mugs of coffee to the table, then produced a small cup of milk for Emma. "Now, Mr. Garrett," she said, taking her seat across from him. "Let's discuss this proposition of yours. I must admit I'm still skeptical that you truly need my advice on farming." Samuel leaned forward, earnest. "Mrs. Hawkins, I've been running cattle my whole life. Crops are a mystery to me. But with beef prices fluctuating as they are, diversification makes good business sense." He explained his plan in detail, setting aside 20 acres of his vast ranch for experimental crop farming, with Abigail advising on soil preparation, planting, and harvesting. He would provide the seed, equipment, and labor. She would provide the knowledge. "And for this, you're offering $3 a week?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "That's more than many men make, Mr. Garrett. It's a fair price for expertise," he countered. "And it would require you to visit the ranch regularly to oversee the work. I'd send a wagon for you, of course." Abigail sipped her coffee, considering. "And what about our own farm? I can't simply abandon it." "I've thought of that," Samuel said quickly. "Part of our arrangement could include help preparing your fields for spring planting. My men could have your land ready in a day or 2. She studied him, her brown eyes searching his face. "You're being very generous, Mr. Garrett. I'm being practical," he insisted. "Your knowledge has value. I'm simply paying a fair price for it." After a long moment, she nodded. "Very well, I accept your terms with one condition." "Name it." "I want to learn about cattle ranching in return." At his surprised look, she continued, "If diversification makes sense for you, perhaps it makes sense for us as well. On a much smaller scale, of course." Samuel couldn't help but smile at her shrewdness. "That seems more than fair, Mrs. Hawkins." "Abigail," she said softly, "if we're to be business partners of a sort, you might as well call me Abigail." "Samuel," he returned, extending his hand across the table. Her fingers were slender but strong as they clasped his, and that same spark he'd felt before flickered between them. This time, she didn't pull away immediately, and their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Emma broke the moment, bouncing in her chair. "Does this mean we get to see the cows?" Abigail laughed, a sound that transformed her face and made Samuel's heart skip a beat. "I suppose it does, sweetheart, and the horses, and the cowboys." Emma's excitement was palpable. "Yes, all of that," Samuel confirmed, smiling at the child's enthusiasm. "In fact, I brought something that might interest you both." He gestured toward the door. "It's in the wagon, if you'd care to see." Outside, he lifted a burlap sack from the wagon bed. "Winter wheat," he explained to Abigail. "Sturdy variety that should do well in this soil. I thought we might plant some on your land as well as mine as a test." Her eyes widened. "That's enough seed for 10 acres. Consider it an investment in our partnership," he said, setting the sack down carefully. "And there's something else." He reached into the wagon and produced a smaller package wrapped in brown paper. "For Miss Emma." The little girl accepted the package with wide eyes. "For me?" "Really, really," Samuel confirmed, with Abigail's nod of permission. Emma tore open the paper to reveal a small wooden horse expertly carved and polished to a smooth shine. "Oh," she gasped, stroking the wooden animal reverently. "It's beautiful. It was made by Mr. Franklin in town," Samuel explained. "He's quite talented." "What do you say, Emma?" Abigail prompted. "Thank you, Mr. Samuel." Emma launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his legs in a fierce hug. Surprised, Samuel patted her head awkwardly, unused to such displays of affection. When he looked up, he found Abigail watching them with a complicated expression, gratitude mixed with something like wariness. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I wanted to," he replied simply. Later, after they'd unloaded the wagon and discussed the details of their arrangement, Samuel prepared to leave. The afternoon was waning, painting the landscape in golden hues that softened its harshness. "I'll send the wagon for you on Monday morning, if that suits," he said, gathering the reins. Abigail nodded, one hand resting on Emma's shoulder as the child clutched her new wooden horse. "Monday will be fine." Samuel hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I almost forgot, I brought something else." He held out a small paper bag. "Apple seeds. The tree won't bear fruit for several years, but, well, Emma mentioned your pie." Abigail took the bag, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "Thank you, that was thoughtful." As Samuel drove away, he glanced back to see them still standing there, the slender woman and the small girl, framed against the weathered farmhouse. Something tugged at his heart, a feeling he couldn't quite name, but that left him both unsettled and strangely content. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to Samuel's life. Twice a week, his wagon would bring Abigail to the ranch, where she would inspect the progress on the experimental fields, consult with his men on soil conditions, and offer suggestions for irrigation improvements. As autumn advanced, Samuel found himself looking forward to these visits with increasing eagerness. Abigail was proving to be not only knowledgeable about farming, but quick-witted and observant about all aspects of ranch operations. She asked intelligent questions, offered practical suggestions, and gradually seemed to relax in his company. Emma usually accompanied her mother, delighting in exploring the ranch under the watchful eyes of Samuel's housekeeper, Mrs. Jenkins. The little girl had a natural affinity for animals, and soon became a favorite among the ranch hands, who taught her to feed the chickens and brush the gentler horses. One crisp October afternoon, Samuel found Abigail standing at the edge of the newly plowed field, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "The soil looks good here," she commented as he approached. "Better drainage than on our land." "We're at a slightly higher elevation," Samuel agreed, coming to stand beside her. "Less prone to springtime flooding." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, surveying the work. The men had finished for the day, and the ranch was settling into the quiet of approaching evening. "Emma seems to be enjoying herself," Samuel observed, nodding toward where the child was helping Mrs. Jenkins collect eggs from the henhouse, her delighted laughter carrying across the yard. Abigail smiled. "She's blossomed these past weeks. It's been difficult for her since Thomas died. She's needed more than just me and our empty farm. She's a remarkable child," Samuel said. "You've done well with her, especially under such trying circumstances." Abigail's hand went unconsciously to her wedding ring, turning it on her finger. "We manage." Samuel hesitated, then ventured, "You still haven't told me how you came to be in that pawnshop that day." She stiffened slightly, then sighed. "It's not a complicated story. The drought killed our crops. The bank was threatening foreclosure. We needed money for food." She shrugged, attempting nonchalance. "The ring was all I had left to pawn." "I'm sorry," Samuel said quietly. "That must have been a difficult decision." "It was just a ring," she replied, but her voice betrayed her. "No," Samuel contradicted gently. "It wasn't just a ring." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the barriers Abigail maintained so carefully seemed to lower. "No," she admitted. "It wasn't." Impulsively, Samuel reached out and took her hand, the one with the wedding band. "You loved him very much." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes. We were childhood sweethearts, married at 18. Her voice softened with memory. "He was kind and hardworking, everything I could have wanted in a husband." Samuel felt a pang of something like jealousy, which he immediately recognized as inappropriate. "He was fortunate to have you." Abigail withdrew her hand gently. "It's getting late, we should be heading back." The moment had passed, but something had shifted between them. As they walked back toward the main house, Samuel ventured, "There's a harvest dance in town next Saturday. Perhaps you and Emma might attend." As my guests, Abigail looked surprised. "A dance? I haven't been to one since before Thomas fell ill." "All the more reason to go," Samuel suggested. "Emma would enjoy the music, I'm sure." She considered for a moment. "I'll think about it." It wasn't until they were in the wagon, heading back to the Hawkins farm, that Abigail gave her answer. "We'll come to the dance," she said suddenly. "Emma should experience such things, and it would be nice to hear music again." Samuel felt an unreasonable surge of happiness. "Excellent. I'll collect you at 6. The week passed slowly for Samuel, filled with the usual ranch business but punctuated by thoughts of the upcoming dance. When Saturday finally arrived, he found himself unusually nervous as he drove the wagon up to the Hawkins farmhouse, dressed in his best shirt and string tie. His nervousness evaporated when the door opened and Emma burst out, twirling to show off her dress, clearly an old one of Abigail's that had been cut down and refashioned for the child. Her hair was arranged in careful curls, tied with a ribbon. "Mr. Samuel, look at my pretty dress." "And Mama looks like an angel." Samuel's breath caught as Abigail emerged, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. Her hair was arranged more elaborately than he'd ever seen it, with small white flowers tucked into the coiled braids. "You look beautiful," he said, the words escaping before he could consider them. A blush rose in Abigail's cheeks. "Thank you, it's an old dress, I had to let it out a bit." She looked down self-consciously. "I've gained some weight since I started eating regularly again." The candid admission struck Samuel forcefully. He'd known things had been desperate for her, but to hear her acknowledge it so plainly that his employment had meant the difference between having enough to eat and not humbled him. "The color suits you," he said simply, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. The town hall was decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty pumpkins, corn shocks, and dried wheat arranged artfully around the perimeter of the room. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the gathering, where nearly everyone from Cottonwood Springs and the surrounding farms and ranches had assembled. Abigail was initially hesitant, staying close to Samuel's side as they entered. But Emma's excitement was infectious, and soon Abigail was greeting old friends and neighbors, some of whom she hadn't seen since Thomas's funeral. "Mrs. Hawkins, what a lovely surprise," Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, exclaimed. "And is this Emma? My goodness, she's grown." Emma performed a perfect curtsy, causing the older woman to smile approvingly. "Such manners, and you, Mr. Garrett, how kind of you to escort the Hawkins ladies this evening." Samuel felt Abigail tense beside him, aware of the speculation in Mrs. Peterson's tone. "Mrs. Hawkins has been providing valuable agricultural consultation for my ranch," he explained. It seemed only right to include her and Emma in the community celebration. The explanation seemed to satisfy Mrs. Peterson, though her knowing smile suggested she drew her own conclusions. As the evening progressed, Samuel noticed similar reactions from others' curious glances, whispered conversations. He worried about how Abigail might feel about being the subject of town gossip, but she appeared either unaware or unconcerned, focused on ensuring Emma was enjoying herself. The local fiddle band struck up a lively tune, and couples took to the floor for a spirited square dance. Emma watched with wide eyes, clapping in time to the music. "May I have this dance, Miss Emma?" Samuel asked formally, bowing to the delighted child. Emma giggled and looked to her mother for permission. At Abigail's nod, Samuel led the little girl onto the dance floor, showing her the basic steps and lifting her occasionally to her squealing delight. From the sidelines, Abigail watched them, a soft smile playing on her lips. When the dance ended and Samuel returned Emma to her side, Abigail's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said softly. "She needed that, she needs." She hesitated. A man's influence in her life sometimes. The next song was slower, a waltz that filled the hall with sweet, yearning notes. "Would you do me the honor, Mrs. Hawkins?" Samuel asked, extending his hand, Abigail hesitated, her fingers unconsciously going to her wedding ring. I don't know if I should. It's just a dance, Samuel assured her, though they both knew it wasn't, not really. After a moment's consideration, she placed her hand in his. Just a dance, she agreed. As he led her onto the floor, Samuel was acutely aware of the eyes following them. Abigail must have sensed it too, for she said quietly, "People are watching." "Let them," Samuel replied, placing his hand respectfully at her waist. "We're doing nothing wrong." They moved together to the music, a bit awkwardly at first, then with increasing confidence. Abigail was light in his arms, her body gradually relaxing as they circled the floor. "I haven't danced since my wedding day," she confessed, looking up at him with a mixture of guilt and pleasure. "You dance beautifully," Samuel told her, resisting the urge to draw her closer. "So do you." "I wouldn't have expected a cattle rancher to be so graceful," he smiled. "My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a hobbled horse." Abigail laughed, the sound causing several nearby dancers to look their way. She was wise. As the music swelled, Samuel found himself lost in the moment, the warmth of Abigail's hand in his, the scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the way her eyes reflected the lantern light. When the song ended, he was reluctant to release her. "Thank you," she said softly, stepping back but maintaining their handclasp for a moment longer than necessary. Emma ran up to them, breaking the spell. "Mama, you were dancing. You looked so pretty." Abigail smoothed her daughter's hair, a blush rising in her cheeks. "Thank you, sweetheart." The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant blur of music, conversation, and laughter. Abigail seemed to relax more as the night went on, even accepting an invitation to join the ladies' circle, while Samuel took Emma for refreshments. "You and the widow Hawkins seem quite friendly," observed Richard Miller, Samuel's nearest neighbor, as they stood by the punch bowl. "Something we should know about," Samuel frowned. "Mrs. Hawkins is providing agricultural consultation for my ranch expansion. She's also a neighbor in need of support after losing her husband. That's all there is to know, Rick." Miller raised his hands in mock surrender. "No offense meant, just making conversation. She's a fine-looking woman, and that little girl needs a father. Folks are bound to speculate." Before Samuel could respond, Emma tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Samuel, can we take some cake to Mama? She loves cake but never gets any." His irritation with Miller forgotten, Samuel smiled down at the child. "An excellent suggestion, Miss Emma. Let's select the biggest piece." By the time they returned to Abigail, the conversation with the other women had turned to the upcoming Christmas festivities, with talk of decorations for the church and preparations for the children's pageant. "Emma would make a perfect angel," Mrs. Peterson was saying. "If you'll be staying in Cottonwood Springs, that is, we weren't sure." Abigail looked puzzled. "Why wouldn't we be staying?" The women exchanged glances. "Well, with the drought and all, we'd heard the bank might be foreclosing on several properties, including yours. There was talk you might be moving back east to family." "I have no family in the east," Abigail said stiffly, "and while it's been difficult, we're managing. In fact, we've planted winter wheat this year." Samuel stepped forward, handing her the cake. "Mrs. Hawkins has been instrumental in helping me establish crop farming on part of my ranch. Her expertise has been invaluable." The gratitude in Abigail's eyes was worth any amount of town gossip. The evening wound down shortly after, with Emma falling asleep against her mother's shoulder as the last dances were played. The drive back to the Hawkins farm was quiet, Emma slumbering in her mother's lap, while Abigail gazed up at the star-filled sky. "Thank you for this evening," she said finally. "It was more enjoyable than I expected." "I'm glad," Samuel replied. "Though I apologize for any discomfort the town gossips might have caused." Abigail shook her head. "People will talk, it's the way of small towns." She hesitated. "Does it bother you, being linked to a widow with a child?" The question caught him off guard. "Not at all. Why would it?" She shrugged, her face half hidden in shadow. "You're one of the most eligible bachelors in the county." I'm sure there are many young ladies who would be disappointed to see you spending time with someone like me." "Someone like you," Samuel repeated. "You mean intelligent, courageous, and devoted to your child. I can't imagine why that would disappoint anyone." Even in the darkness, he could see her blush. "That's not what I meant. I know what you meant," he said gently. "And I don't care what anyone thinks. I enjoy your company, Abigail, and Emma's." She was quiet for a long moment. "I enjoy yours too," she admitted finally. "More than I should, perhaps." The words hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. As they arrived at her farm, Samuel helped her down from the wagon, careful not to wake Emma. "I can carry her in," he offered. Abigail nodded gratefully, and Samuel lifted the sleeping child, following Abigail into the house and to the small bedroom where Emma slept. He laid her gently on the bed, then stepped back as Abigail removed the child's shoes and covered her with a quilt. "Sweet dreams, my love," Abigail whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. In the main room, lit only by the dying embers in the fireplace, they stood facing each other, the evening's revelations hanging between them. "I should go," Samuel said, though he made no move toward the door. "Yes," Abigail agreed, equally stationary. They stood in silence, the tension between them almost palpable. Finally, Samuel took a step forward. "Abigail, please don't," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't say anything that we'll both regret." Samuel stopped, respecting her wishes. "As you wish, but I regret nothing about tonight." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him at the door. "Samuel." He looked back to find her standing with her hand extended, something small and gold glinting in her palm. "My ring," she said simply. "I'd like to return it to you." Confusion washed over him. "But it's your wedding ring. I bought it back for you." She shook her head. "And I promised to repay you. This is the first installment." "Abigail, no, I don't want your ring. And I don't want to wear it anymore," she said quietly. "Not because I didn't love Thomas. I did with all my heart. But he's gone and I'm still here. Emma's still here, and we need to live, not just survive." Samuel approached slowly, understanding the significance of what she was offering. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm sure. Thomas would want us to be happy. He'd want Emma to have," she hesitated, "to have what she needs." Samuel covered Abigail's hand with his own, closing her fingers over the ring. "Keep it," he said gently. "Not to wear, if that's your choice, but to give to Emma someday, to remember her father by." Abigail's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding." In that moment, with her face lifted to his in the firelight, Samuel could no longer resist. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. For a heartbeat, she was still. Then, with a soft sigh, she returned the kiss, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. "I should go," Samuel said again, his voice rough. This time, Abigail nodded. "You should, but will you come back tomorrow?" The hope in her voice filled his heart with joy. "Try and stop me," he said with a smile. As he rode home under the vast Colorado sky, Samuel Garrett felt lighter than he had in years. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more town gossip to weather, Emma's feelings to consider, and Abigail's lingering grief to respect. But for the first time, he could envision a future that included not just his ranch but a family to share it with. In the farmhouse, Abigail Hawkins stood at the window, watching until Samuel's wagon disappeared into the darkness. The gold band in her palm caught the last light from the embers, a circle representing a love that had shaped her past. With careful reverence, she placed it in the small box where she kept Thomas's pocket watch and a lock of his hair treasures for Emma to inherit someday. Then she touched her lips, still warm from Samuel's kiss, and allowed herself to imagine a future different from the one she had expected. Not a replacement for what she had lost, but something new, a second chance at happiness for herself and her daughter. Outside, the winter wheat they had planted together lay dormant in the soil, waiting for spring to bring new life to the land. Like the seeds, Their newfound feelings would need time, care, and patience to grow. But the promise was there, as real and tangible as the heartbeat in her chest and the hope in her daughter's sleeping smile. And that, Abigail decided as she prepared for bed, was worth more than all the gold rings in Colorado.